because so much of life is thinking skills. And whatever profession my students end up in, computer science is going to be part of it because there's something coming called citizen programming. Citizen programming means we're going to be able to describe to AI the app or the website or the tool that we want, and it's going to be able to write the code for us. Well, we've got to know what's in those apps and in those tools, but we are this close to citizen programming. That's why computational thinking is so important. I believe we should train teachers all the way down to kindergarten to be able to speak to kids and help teach them computational thinking. Because if a kid can describe the steps of tying their shoe, then one day they're going to be able to describe the steps of ordering shoes and create their own shoe
Wow.
website.
Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Mark Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How are you today, Nick?
Very excited for us, our podcast. How are you doing?
Amazing. This is our first visual podcast. We have been audio only until now, and so happy because the person who really inspired us to take the leap is our guest today, which is Vicki Davis, who was recognized by LinkedIn as one of the top voices in education, known to her audience as the Cool Cat Teacher. Vicki is an award-winning educator, author, and host of the 10-Minute Teacher podcast and the Cool Cat Teacher Talk Show, airing on radio and TV. Her innovative approach to teaching and learning has transformed classrooms around the world. Vicki is the recipient of ISTE's Online Learning Award and has led students on international trips to Mumbai, Doha, and Dubai, among other areas. She is passionate about leveraging instructional technology, empowering educators, and engaging students. Vicki, or do I say Cool Cat, welcome to State of Ed Podcast.
Thanks, Mark and Nick. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, let's just start with the origin story of your moniker, Cool Cat. So how did that all come about?
Well, I have a pretty common name, Vicki Davis. There's a Power Ranger named Vicki Davis. There's a dog catcher in Arizona named Vicki Davis. There's quite a few of us out there. I actually have a sister-in-law named Vicki Davis. That makes things interesting. But back in 2005, when I knew that I needed to go into blogging and I was just jumping into Web 2, wanted to teach my students, I was brainstorming names. I was sitting at my desk. It was a study hall. A sweet young lady named Casey actually ended up helping introduce her to her husband. So she's much older now and a friend of mine. But we were brainstorming. And at the time, my school was the Wildcats. And I probably had 100 names, wasn't happy with any of them. And she says, well, we're the cats and you're cool. So why don't you be the Cool Cat Teacher? And I'm like, oh, hey, that sounds pretty good. But little did I know that now, when I speak at conferences, people will say the Cool Cat Teacher. People will go, oh, that's who that is. So more people know Cool Cat Teacher than Vicki Davis, but that's okay.
That's great. So can you walk us a little bit through your background as an educator?
I did not start off in education. I went to Georgia Tech with a business degree. Went in the cell phone business. I was a stay-at-home mom for a while in the 90s. And when I was a stay-at-home mom, I taught myself website design and I fixed computers. I did all the Y2K stuff. But we have 3 children and 2 of them have learning differences. And so when the kids got in school and got on up there, I knew that in order for them to learn, that I needed to be at the school. It's a little small school. I live in a tiny town of 5,000. So the curriculum director said, hey, Vicki, you would make a great teacher. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. You can't fire your students. I can't fire my employees. And so started on the journey of being a teacher, fell in love with it quickly. Obviously, I had to take a lot of classes, a lot of things. Now I teach AP Computer Science Principles. So I've been able, now that computer science is treated with respect, when I started off, in order to have a degree, I was going to have to take welding. It's like, that was the category that I was in because I kept saying, computer science is not welding. What is this? And things have changed so much. I taught AP for the first time this past year, and all my kids passed the first year. So excited for them.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so I've just learned so much. 2005 is when the blog and podcast started. Created over 30 global collaborative projects, and Thomas Friedman's book The World is Flat helped kids from all over the world collaborate. Of course, the pandemic kind of shut a lot of that down because I was running distance learning. We actually didn't miss any days of learning and got rid of our holidays, and we had some extra days of learning at my school. Didn't sleep. A lot of people look back and say, "Hey, I'd love to go back to that again." Not me. But,
Thank you.
as I've gone through, I just want to share and encourage. I love interviewing teachers and educators. Mark's already been on my show. Nick, I'll have to have you on my show, and just share people's stories. Many years ago, my dad was president of the American Soybean Association. He was a farmer. And he told me, I'm his oldest, and you know how oldists are about their dads. And he said, listen, if you're in a profession that you love, and you talk and share about that profession, you can make a massive difference, because too many people want to advise a profession who don't have boots on the ground. They don't have daily experience. And so in many ways, even though he was a farmer and I'm a teacher, I've modeled a lot of what I do after my dad.
That's wonderful.
That's amazing.
You also identified, Mark's, can I say favorite book or one of your favorite
Yes,
books?
of course.
Oh, okay.
We have to talk about it.
Anytime the world is flat is referenced, yeah, we're in good company.
We must talk about it. So when did you read The World is Flat, and how did that influence you and inspire you to launch the Flat Classroom Project?
Well, read it in 2005, and I was looking for a sort of a way to help my students understand it. And the best way is experiential knowledge. So a lady named Julie Lindsay, who was in Bangladesh at the time, reached out to me, and we merged our classrooms for 6 weeks. The kids actually wrote wikis together on the topics, and World is Flat. So we divided up all the main topics. The kids wrote it together. They produced videos together, and they had to outsource part of their video to the other classroom. We had judges to judge who was the best, and it was just fantastic. Thomas Friedman found out about it, included us in version 3 of his book, and then we just expanded from
Get
there.
outta
We
here.
studied the Horizon projects that they used to be called. We studied lots of different things, and I did that for quite some time until it just became too much, and I couldn't keep up with all the, when you're collaborating with China and Austria and Australia and all over, it, it it takes a lot of time. And when my kids got in high school, I had to go to those basketball and football games. So we did write a book called Flattening Classrooms, Engaging Minds, that really talks about how to collaborate globally. And the interesting thing is, first day of the pandemic, when I knew that I was going to have to take everything to distance learning, I pulled my own book out and I went through and I wrote down all the stuff that I thought I might have forgotten and used it as a pattern to take us to distance learning. And because you can literally merge your classrooms. So I figured if I've worked with people in all these other countries, that I could help my students be able to work together, even though if they were in their homes. And it really has helped me. Global collaboration is so important. It's not happening, I think, quite as much as it used to. We used to have mystery Skype calls and all the things that folks were doing. And we've really got to get back to doing more of that.
Well, I was going to ask you, why do you think we don't do more of it now? Because I agree with you completely.
Yeah, well, right before I did a project called Mad About Mattering. So we had a global collaborative app building project using a tool called Mad Learn. And so we actually proved that the kids could do it. I think the toughest thing is it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes teachers who have flexibility in their schedule. It fits in really well with the IB program. So most of the schools that I would work with would be IB schools of some type. But you do have to have a lot of flexibility in your schedule, and it's a time commitment because the teachers have to meet pretty much every week. So you have to do that at different times. So there are a lot of people who still collaborate globally, and I get back in and do some things here and there. But yeah.
If I could just nerd out for a second about The World is Flat. So when that book came out, I felt like the lights were being turned on for me in terms of how I saw the world and understood the world, and the changes that had taken place literally like under my nose in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so Nick and I literally became like Thomas Friedman groupies. We went to see him speak multiple times. Yeah, we got it. He signed my, like my dad's copy of the book. And like, we
Cool.
were just, because my dad had been reading Thomas Friedman in the Times as a columnist since probably the early 90s or mid 90s, whenever he started writing for them, or late 80s maybe. And it's just such a thrill to follow him. And that book was so impactful. And I know that it completely changed the way I saw education and the role that educators need to play in terms of preparing students for this century. So it's just so nice to hear other people impacted by it, in such meaningful and relevant ways.
And my students. I mean, a lot of those students, the student Casey I was talking about, she and her partner Kanel in Bangladesh actually won. They were in the book too. They won and did a great job on their work. But when she got out of college, she's been to the White House. She's a farmer, but she blogs for Intel sometimes. So she is a farmer who's doing a lot of connecting with anywhere in the world. She actually went with me to Qatar, one of the trips that we took, and those students are forever transformed. And I think that, collaborating is a very important part. Definitely know how to do it and have done it. But you do have to get people on the same page. They do have to be willing to do a few extra hours. It's not like you can clock out at 5 and clock in at 8 and do global collaboration. It just doesn't work.
I'll just tell you one quick funny story, and then I'll let Nick ask this question I know he wants to ask. But I used to bring the book in and just kept talking about the book and talking about the book. And then he says this, and then he says this, and just build a lot of lessons out of the lessons of the flattening world and the 10 flatteners and everything else. And at senior awards night that year, there was a outside guest, and they were giving money, and as an additional gift, as part of the award, they gave away a copy of The World is Flat. And literally all the seniors that I had all pointed to me and pointed at the stage. And I was like, yeah, I know, that's the book, but it was just such an important book, especially that year, just between me and my students. It was like really built a bond around that book. At least I felt it. I don't know if they felt it as much as I did, but I definitely was very passionate about it.
Well, another book that, if you haven't read, The Future's Faster Than You Think by Peter Diamandis, that's kind of the one that my students and I've been studying. And it says that when artificial intelligence jumps on the back of any type of technology, that the change becomes exponential. And so the last couple books that I've been studying, I've had my students do it sort of collaboratively in the classroom, because when those books come along like that, having students write together. Now, Wiki Spaces is gone, so we had to use Notion, which is a very wiki-like environment. I like the wiki for writing together versus Google Docs just because it feels more scholarly, I guess, to me, looks more scholarly. It's more with citations, but just helping kids understand, that books are important. And when people write books, they do so much research and pour into it. And if you want to be a world changer, John Maxwell says readers are leaders and leaders are readers. Read something many years ago, back in 2008, as I continue to date myself, that Brian Tracy said, if you want to be in the top 10% of your profession, read an hour a night. And so I started reading an hour a night. And, that's when all the keynotes started for me, and ended up at Princeton and Harvard and all these places talking about the things we were doing. But reading, I want my kids to understand that even if we're using technology, we're still discussing books, because books remain such a great way, as long as you can kind of filter out the people who are using AI to write it, because AI is really good at average writing and tends to be very uncreative. Now, a human using AI to help write a book, that's a little bit different thing. But, books are important.
We're only 10 minutes in. You've already given me like 17 things I have to share with my students tomorrow. This is crazy. I feel like you're the teacher that's always 10 steps ahead of the educational system in terms of technology and apps and innovation. That's amazing. I know what Mark thought I was going to ask, but one last thing about Thomas Friedman. Um, um, he
You
was
were fanboys, weren't you?
no, we
We weren't
well,
lying.
and then we'll go when he was. I guess Mark, he was being interviewed, right? He was talking about how education in America needs to keep up with the rest of the world. That's when he came up with the equation. So so his equation was CQ plus PQ, right, is greater than IQ. And I feel like, that still holds such relevance today. I mean, more so than ever. We need to be able to inspire our students to be curious and passionate. The joke with Mark is that he says he shared it with me first. I guess I've come around to the fact that he was right. So he shared it with me first.
Vicky, I mean, it's not even a discussion.
Well, I will say when you talk about that, Nick, that one thing I've been teaching my students is about collective intelligence from Adam Grant's book, Hidden Potential. Chapter 8 of that book is a life changer in terms of how you teach kids to work in, quote, groups, because isn't that what everybody hates, group work? And I did a jigsaw and had my students listen to that chapter, and we listed the things that help us collaborate in a group and hurt groups, and talked about narcissistic behavior, for example. There's a fascinating study that was done about NBA point guards who are narcissistic, and their teams actually got worse over the season. And we talked about narcissistic behavior, but do you know, he shared a statistic in there that the people who are elected to lead teams, both in K-12 and beyond, in college and business, are the people who talk the most. I mean, we're all podcasters, so I guess we were the group leaders. But when we listened to that and we discussed it and we dug into that information about how do you build the collective intelligence of a team, does not mean that all the smartest people are on that team. It's the people who know how to have pro-social skills and know how to work together. I have more introverts as project managers on my current app building project than I have ever had. And it's incredible to see the dynamics on those teams and what happens when you help students understand group work doesn't have to be a disaster, that we have to. And that's the same as that EQ. We have to be able to work together. And that's something AI can't do. It can't help us work together. That's something we humans have to do.
The way, Nick, I'm sorry, Vicky, if you were an FBI profiler working up a case on Nick, you couldn't have done a better job in transitioning from Thomas Friedman as an example to the NBA as an example, because the only thing he
Really?
loves more than Thomas Friedman is basketball. So well done.
Accidents happen, don't they?
Yeah,
Not an accident at all.
I was a varsity basketball coach for over 20 years. So,
Wow.
but here's the real question I want to ask. Just as an AP computer science teacher, can you give us a little bit of insight into how you approach the class on a daily basis? What you would say your your philosophy is on how you complete the curriculum in time, prepare kids for the exams, conduct daily lessons. I'm just curious,
Well, I am a bit of a renegade. I use something called Code Combat to teach coding. It's totally game-based, has AI built into it. I can teach faster and better than, I mean, I'm already 3/4 of the way through all the coding pieces, starting into all of the content that they have to know. My students can code their way out of a box. I mean, they are great coders, but a lot of it is because I'm using a tool that can support me so very well. When I found, it's Code Combat, and then they have another side called Azaria. So I use Azaria to teach Python with my ninth graders, and then my seniors use something called Code Combat. They have a complete curriculum, so I use their stuff. I use a college level book that I've actually used for 20 years, the current version of it though. So that content I'm very familiar with. And so my classroom, they're doing a lot of hands-on, they're doing a lot lecture. If we're talking, it's a class conversation because they're doing things constantly. Today they were doing memory conversion, binary numbers, all these things, but I'm real big on formative assessment, Nick. So if you read any of the stuff I write, you'll see that I believe in checking for understanding every 8 minutes, which is a little below that the actual number you're supposed to do. But if I do that, then if I slip, I still get it in, in that 10 to 15 minute window. I do a lot of formative assessments. So when I got ready to give the kids the test today, these kids have learned binary numbers in a memory conversion so quickly, much faster than a lot of my other classes. But I had the formative assessment data to know that they were pretty much going to ace it, except for 2 kids. And those 2 kids, a lot of times when I see that I have kids that aren't ready, I'll email their parents, even if they're a senior, and I'll say, hey, looking at what they're doing in class, I'm not sure they're ready. They need to make sure they study. And those are the kids who had a little bit of a struggle today. And then we'll go again tomorrow. The kids earn their grades, but it is pretty hard to end up with a 0 in any grade from my class because I'm going to go after those kids to get them to do it because the knowledge is cumulative. I do lean heavily on the College Board content because they do ask the questions very, very differently. Students are allowed to use AI, but if they use it, they have to cite it. And I retain the right to have them explain any line of code. And if they can't explain it to me, the other day, students were writing a project for me, and I had a student who turned in some code that was like stuff I don't know how to do. And I'm like, okay, explain this to me. They couldn't explain it. I said, well, why is it in your code? And AI, they're finding, and I've seen this, is actually extremely inefficient at writing code. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but we use something in computer science called parameters, and we write functions with parameters. And AI doesn't want to do that. AI just wants to write like 5,000 lines of code when it could write a function and save like half of it. So I could usually find it. So that has been the biggest challenge for me, is helping my students understand that you've got to know how to do it. You've got to be able to explain it, to test each other's work. And, sometimes they look at me with blank stares on their face because I've asked them to do something that's really hard, they think. But then I show them, there's an assignment I have coming up on Friday. Like, you guys should be able to write this in 5 lines of code. And they're going to look at me and they are going to just glaze over. And then I will guide them through the process of, okay, where do we start? Because so much of life is thinking skills. And whatever profession my students end up in, computer science is going to be part of it because there's something coming called citizen programming. Citizen programming means we're going to be able to describe to AI the app or the website or the tool that we want, and it's going to be able to write the code for us. Now, I'll put a condition on that. I believe any code that's launched out into the wild anywhere must be supervised by a human being. So I think there's actually going to be a demand for more coders, not less, because I think that responsible schools are going to want to have IT departments. Because think about it. Bill Gates, he first started programming when he created the school scheduling system at his school. And his school looked up, and all of a sudden, Bill Gates was in the classes with all the pretty girls, and there were no guys in those classes. That is a documented fact. You can look it up. And you can't release apps and release tools. And so often in schools, we're like, hey, look what the kids made. Well, we've got to know what's in those apps and in those tools, but we are this close to citizen programming. That's why computational thinking is so important. I believe we should train teachers all the way down to kindergarten to be able to speak to kids and help teach them computational thinking. Because if a kid can describe the steps of tying their shoe, then one day they're going to be able to describe the steps of ordering shoes and create their own shoe website. So teaching kids to describe procedures, teaching kids to create and invent and also develop all of this, emotional intelligence and collective intelligence capabilities that they need is so important. But computer science, some people consider the AP computer science course to be the quote easiest. I hadn't seen that because it's pretty doggone hard to me, but it's important because it's something that you don't have to be going into computer science for the rest of your life to be able to do.
Thank you again, because I'm taking that time your shoelace. comment and using it in my next department meeting. So I just want you to be aware of that.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot of content on computational thinking, and it's a strategic curriculum issue in every school and every subject. So just like we've been doing writing and reading across the curriculum, we're going to have computational thinking across the curriculum because it's just
Right.
the nature of the world we're in now.
That's right. Were you always drawn to technology, or was it an evolution for you?
Absolutely. I told you my dad was a farmer, and he was actually in Popular Mechanics in the 70s. I was one of the first users of a computer, and he wrote a spreadsheet program. And when Lotus 123, if you remember that, they actually called him about how he wrote his program.
Get out of
And
here.
so Dad had all this charts of all the commodities prices, and I would do that for him. But he allowed me to write in a program called BASIC. So I wrote text-based adventure games before I was 10, and just fell in love with computers. And I knew, and the interesting thing is I live in South Georgia. So, not only is it not typical for a female in my generation to do it, definitely not in South Georgia. And so I visited all these colleges. I thought I was going to go to Vanderbilt, and they said, well, we don't think there's anything about this computer revolution thing. And I went to
My
Georgia
God.
Tech, and they had and Vanderbilt's a great school. My uncle went there, nothing against it. This was 1987, right? So went to Georgia Tech. They had Apple computers, and they had the Next computers, and they had all these different things. And I was just like, it's for me. I was programming in
Mm,
HyperCard in 1989. It was the precursor to HTML. It was on a Mac. Computers, I just adore them. But they're dumb. They only do what people tell them to do. And
for now.
yeah, for now. But I want my girls that I teach, young ladies, to know that we are not limited. If you're interested, yeah, I played with Barbie, so that's great. But I actually, I actually would try to divide up my big Webster's children's encyclopedia into content. And I had a club where I taught everybody the dictionary and the encyclopedia because I love teaching too. But technology is important. But I always talk about innovating like a turtle. That's the strategy I teach my teachers. IT director until last year when I went part time. I blog and podcast in the morning, and then I teach 4 classes in the afternoon. And I teach my teachers,
But
to turtle,
It's
innovate
amazing.
like a turtle, take 15 minutes twice a week to learn something new, and share it when you find something new that's awesome. And we have to model an innovative mindset to our students so they see us
Uh,
try new things out. Sometimes I go to my students and say, hey, I'm trying this out. It might be a disaster. It might be great.
Right.
Sometimes it's a disaster. But if it is, I teach them how to beta test. We've been beta testing an AI feedback tool that you talk to that gives you verbal feedback.
Oh my
That's
Lord.
been pretty cool. It's called Mirror Talk, and it's a lot of fun. It's great for older kids. They're still working some kinks out, but so many fun things out there to try. And I kind of want a little bit of that to wear off on the kids, but also to understand that we need to use these things in moral and ethical
Yes.
ways.
Yes.
And AI has to be the creators of AI have to be held accountable for their AI. You can't slough off what it does and say, "Oh, it's not my fault." You are accountable and responsible because there's some things happening with AI that if we don't speak up, this autonomous weapon debate, you could just destroy every human overnight. I don't think it's going to happen, but our kids need to graduate from high school caring deeply about the moral and
Mm,
ethical use of technology.
that is
wow.
so powerful. I couldn't agree more. And that explain, just listening to you, I can understand why your message resonates with so many people and why you're able to connect with so many people through your podcast and your radio and TV work, because you're not just speaking from the mind, you're speaking from the heart as well. And it's very powerful.
Well, that's part of who we are. We're human beings, not human doings. And before we make our to-do list, we need to make our to-be list. Like, who do I want to be? I want to be forgiving. I want to be kind. I want to be loving. I want to be respectful. I want to value every single child in my classroom because they are important. And the reason that I do the blog and the podcast is that there are kids out there hurting. And I was that kid for 5 years. I was picked on in middle school. The kids told me that nobody would ever love me, that I had no common sense, nobody would ever listen to me, and that I didn't even need to be on this planet. Nobody would ever marry me, that I was worthless. I mean, all of these things were said to me. It was 5 extremely hard years. I am a woman of faith, and so my faith became very strong because I knew that I was a person of worth, even if I wasn't treated that way. And so when I see children that don't fit in, one of the things that Adam Grant says in his book Originals is that, do you know that the most creative people, the ones that go on to be the most creative and who test the highest for creativity, never are teacher pets? Teachers tend to not like them. Oh, that breaks my heart. That should never be. Like, I want to see those creative kids who don't fit in because that was me,
Right.
and they're out there. And so many kids are hurting and lonely. And it's like, okay, so I have my kids that I'm teaching and pouring everything I have. But if I can find other teachers who are like-minded, like you gentlemen are, and we can spread the message that teaching is a noble calling. I'm an artist. I go to school every day and I do art, the art of teaching. It is a noble profession. And just because there are people phoning it in, of course, because every profession has them. The thing is when you're a teacher, you're messing with something precious and priceless. And so it just, when you have somebody phoning it in who's a teacher and just not doing their best, and it's hard to do your best every day, but somebody who just doesn't measure up or does something hurtful, and I've done hurtful things. When I mess up, I do damage. It's a huge responsibility, and I have to ask forgiveness and that I'm sorry, and that we need more people who understand that, yes, my retirement plan is not what it would have been if I had stayed in business. It's just not. But as I look back on the life I have lived, it is an adventure. And I love working with kids. I love talking to teachers. Teachers are some of the best people on the planet. And when you go, like you guys had the interview with the Sparkle crew or whatever it was I was just listening to, and they're fascinating people. I mean, if you want to meet amazing people, talk to teachers. They're the best.
Unbelievable. As I'm listening to you, um, I, I, all the problems in education, of course, are going through my head.
Yeah.
But when somebody is as inspiring as you rise above it. And I think that's the message that we have to get out to teachers, is that, yes, there are a lot of problems and obstacles and hurdles that sometimes seem insurmountable. But Mark, I'll just speak for him because he says this all the time. But the students we have in our class don't have time for us to wait while the problems are solved. You're making it happen. And as you said, there are great teachers all over the country who are making it happen. We just need to get more people on board.
So my mom was a teacher, and she had to teach me because I had a lot to learn, and I had a disastrous first year and sent kids to the office all the time. I mean, now I never send kids to the office, but it happened.
You have to go through that. Yeah.
But she had dementia, and this is the big lesson I learned. She passed away in 2020, and just an amazing woman, and we were able to keep her at home and serve her and love her. But about a year before she passed, she couldn't remember my name. But let me tell you what she could remember. She was hired and got back into teaching because there were 12 kids who weren't going to pass and they weren't going to graduate. 11 boys on the football team and a girl. Okay. They were not going to make it. And several of the teachers said, I'm not coming back if you make me teach these. So the headmaster had gone to my mom and said, I know you're a great teacher, and I think you're the last hope for these kids. And so, not in front of them, but she called them her bad boys to us, the family, because they were bad. I mean, they did bad stuff. They were just flat out did awful things that I won't even talk about. But she was a great cook. So she would make cookies, and she would put them on the little stool at the front of the room, and she'd write all her standards on the board for the day. And she said, okay, y'all, this is what we're going to do. It can take as long or as short as you want to, but you're going to learn this stuff.
That's
And
great.
when we're done, we'll have this. And then the next day was bread, and the next day was a cake or whatever. She did anything she could to get those kids to learn, and she took them on field trips. The principal didn't want to let them go on field trips. She says, no, my kids are going to go on field trips to this historical site. She worked with them, and she said, okay, guys, for you to go, you each have to have one really good question, like really good question, and you have to ask it. So she had worked with those kids on their questions. So they go. Then you have the, quote, bright kids, and I was in the bright category, so I could say that, the bright kids. But these were kids who looked down and made fun of the bad boys Mama had. And they go and they get off the bus, and Mom's kids are like asking the guides these questions. And, you know, when you love a history, your face lights up, and the guides are like, who are these kids? You know, these are amazing kids. It was Mom's kids that were just knocking it out of the park and came back with all of these great things. And so Mom, she forgot my name, but she still remembered all of her bad boys. She remembered the experience, and she could talk about it. Now, if that doesn't teach us about what's important, I have learned that problems are the canvas upon which we paint the future of
Ooh.
children. And my principal always laughs at this. When I have a kid who really misbehaves or does something wrong, I had a kid who I caught her trying to take a test, and she had opened up a tab trying to look up the content on the test. And so I dealt with it and told her, you know, this is not who you are. This is not who you're going to be. The goal is restoration, really restore that relationship. Well, my father was sick, and I was out for a week. He had surgery, and I had a class really misbehave. It was this person's class. But the student who I had that restored relationship with was the star student of the class. And my principal was just like, my goodness, star student of the class. And so I had 15 kids in that class. And when I got back and we worked through the issues of helping them understand behavior, I had 9 kids who misbehaved, and I had 9 apology letters in 2 days. And it wasn't coercion. They admitted to stuff I didn't even know they did, you know, but it's about relationship and respect, because they are not their behavior. Even though Mom might have jokingly called those boys her bad boys, they behaved in some bad ways, but she saw their nobility. She saw their potential. She saw who they were. And so the kids can't help the generation they were born into. They can't help the crazy stuff that's going on. Now, they can put down their phones and study for a second. You know, we can help them make those choices as we talk to them. But I believe that my students are world-class and God-honoring. That's what I believe they are and who they can be. And anytime they behave below that, we're going to talk about that behavior. We're going to set the expectations for who they need to be and who they can be, and we're going to rise up. And that's why if I ever hear a teacher say, you know, talk not positively about a child, they're my target to be my star student. They're going to be great for me. But I learned that from my mom, and I also learned that with a heartache of having 2 kids who had learning differences, who sometimes didn't have teachers who had patience. And I learned that being the kid that didn't fit in, that didn't have any friends, that everybody had a party and nobody invited. And I'm absolutely passionate about reaching every child, because these children, you know, Mom always said that when you have crazy stuff going on in the front office, when you close that door, everything you got in that room, you brought. And if you bring that stuff in from the front office, that's your fault. You got to learn to close the door on everything happening in the hall and everything happening in the office, and make it a life-changing, amazing experience for those kids. And some of them will like you and some of them won't. But you got to know that at the end of the day, you gave everything you had. And one of her longest lasting memories was that she gave everything she had to a bunch of kids who didn't really appreciate her until much later. And those kids still talk about her, and they are in their 40s now. Yeah.
Amazing.
What a great story.
Yeah.
So I want to wrap up our conversation a little bit along the lines of where we started in terms of technology. Obviously, AI, you've mentioned it multiple times now in this conversation. If you could reduce it to one word and talk about the impact that AI is going to have on teaching and learning in the next 3 to 5 years in one word, what word would you select and why?
Complicated. You know, AI is the issue of our time. And my hope is all the good, moral, amazing people who love kids and love humankind won't tune out for the next 10 years. We need to be talking about it in our classrooms. And it's not an easy situation. I mean, when quantum computing gets unleashed,
Right.
whoever has that is going to have the power to crack any password on the planet. That's scary. That's scary. That's your banking institutions. That's your grading systems. That's everything. And, there's the old theologian from Jurassic Park, just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? Malcolm,
Yeah,
Professor,
Jeff
yeah,
Goldblum. Yeah.
yeah. And we need to be asking questions and we need to be having the conversations. And, when I see people say, oh, AI will help me do this, and they just pasted all their confidential student data into Chat GPT. I'm just like, what are you thinking? Like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Right.
Our kids, they need a future and they need the choice to be private. I mean, I have one child who's completely stayed off social media, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. So it's gonna be so complicated, and we've got to ask the hard questions. We've got to have the conversations, and just because something looks amazing, like so my fear is this: we're going to get some cute little cartoon character. Let's say Disney license Elsa to some reading company, okay? And Elsa's going to teach your child to read. Isn't that going to be great? And that reading company has licensed Elsa, and Elsa helps your kids with their homework, and Elsa is like talking to your kids all the time. And then, hey, Elsa's now on your phone and talking to the kids. And then a school finds out that that particular company is not being ethical with the data, or is not properly standards aligned, or is just not run by people with the best at heart for these children. And your district goes and tries to cancel that. And you're going to end up with 1,000 first graders on the front doorsteps of the school crying because you killed Elsa. So um, there's just so much potential for manipulation. And so we need a line that says, okay, we're going to use AI to support learning, but not to manipulate children. And that's why I think it's so complicated because, yeah, education is great, but humans are greater. So we have to do the thinking for them because they can't see the long-term repercussions of what we're doing. And we are just so eager. Anything that gets kids to test better, we're going to do it. And that's not a good place to be. It's not the right place to be. Kids are more than numbers on a test. And we all say that, and so much is tied to testing, but that's why it's so complicated. So I had one word and then 1,000 to go with it.
That's
Merry
amazing.
Christmas.
I've met an awful lot of teachers in my life, and I don't know if I've ever met anybody who was truly born to teach as more than you.
Wow, that's
I
kind.
don't think there is any question that your mom is looking down incredibly proud and touched by what you have already done and what you will continue to do. Because there's some magical things you told us today that are going to really inspire us, which will in turn, lead to a lot of other people be impacted
Yeah,
because of your work.
hopefully. There's so many teachers out there that are amazing. And we truly have a noble profession. And I'm so glad we get to do it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Vicki Davis, thank you so much for being on State of Ed podcast. And thank you very much for introducing us to this new podcasting
Yeah.
program and being here for the maiden voyage. We will have links to all of your website and socials and everything else on our show notes. And of course, if you'd like to catch back episodes of State of Ed Podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon, or YouTube. You can find us on the web at stateofedpodcast.com, where you'll find those links that I just mentioned. You could also follow me on Twitter at Marcus6 or Marcus6.com, YouTube at EduPyro. And I'm so happy to say it's finally here. My book, Captivate, Engaging and Empowering Students in a
Yay.
World of Digital Distractions. It's available on Amazon, just sold out at the AMLE conference this past weekend, and I'm super excited to share it with educators everywhere. So please pick up a copy today. Vicki Davis, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your wisdom and sharing your very wonderful and amazing and personal stories with us.
Thank
Thank you.